And these two scientific discoveries, they correspond directly with the Bible's worldview assertion that a supernatural personal being is responsible for creating and sustaining the universe. Hi, welcome to Elysian Inns. So today we're going to be talking about a foundation for a Christian metaphysic. But first, when we talk about a worldview is a mental map of reality. Speaking about maps, anybody who knows me well knows that I have a horrible sense of direction. I typically will not leave the house and drive more than, say, 10 to 15 miles without using a GPS app on my phone or some sort of navigational map that will make sure that I get from point A to point B. If I'm not using this app and you're expecting for me to arrive, well, don't hold your breath because it's probably not going to happen. But lately, I've been having an issue with the particular map software that I use, where whenever I open up this app, it gives me a false location. It tells me that I'm somewhere else. And I have to close the app and then reopen it, and hopefully it'll line up with the GPS and it'll give me that sense of you are here, right? I can see the street that I'm on, I can see where I'm at. And then from there, I can proceed forward onto my destination. Well, worldview is that mental map of reality. It gives you that sense of here is where you are. It allows you to place yourself within the world and understand what it is that is true about the world. And it is the lens in which we see through. And so if we open up our worldview and we don't have the proper alignment with reality, what corresponds to what is true, then we may not have the ability to properly navigate and live our lives within the world that we find ourselves in. Now, so is there a correct map of reality? How do we restart that map to get that true sense of where we are? Well, that is found in a Christian worldview. And specifically, as an aid to a Christian worldview, Christian philosophy is the only way to build that sufficient map that corresponds from what the Bible teaches us, that corresponds back to reality. And it is coherent with all of the data that is available about the world. And so what we find is by allowing the Bible to guide our metaphysical map, that's our map of what is true about the world, by allowing the Bible to guide the formation of that map, we find ourselves inside of the story, and we find ourselves being able to rightfully see the true and good and beautiful story of reality. Because what the true story of reality is, it's a story of enchantment. It's a story where we are in a world where we are all sojourners on a journey. And that journey is pointed towards home. Home not being a special because of the place that it is, but because of who is there waiting for us. Because we learn that we are personal creatures that are meant for relationship. But yet we live in a broken world that has all kinds of problems with the relationships that we find in this world. And so this place that is special because of the one who's waiting for us there, it's a person that knows us fully and deeply and lovingly. And it's in his presence, this person that is waiting for us there, that we find the fulfillment of the deepest longings of our heart. When we find ultimately a contentment which there's no match for that level of contentment. And thus it's a story that rightly points to our end. In other words, what we were designed for. And it acts as a compass. It acts as that GPS for our hearts, and it points us towards our purpose. That's, after all, what this YouTube channel is named after, Elysian Inns. paradise, and end is which is our purpose. We are pointed towards our purpose in paradise. And what makes paradise is not the place. It's who's there waiting for us. It's him. It's our Lord Jesus Christ. And after all, it's for him that we were created for and created to be with. And so the Christian worldview, it gives us the proper tools to integrate this true story of reality with how we perceive and experience this story in our daily lives. It answers that question: how should we live? Now, all truth belongs to God. So everything that is true about this world belongs to God because he's the one that created it. We cannot have two sets of truth. We can't have something that is true to my faith and something that is true to this world. There's no true secular belief. It's either ultimately true about this world and what God has created, or it's false. And so what we have to ask is, but is that right? You know, I've said a whole bunch of things here. Is what I've said, is that true? Does it correspond to reality? Because if something is real, if something's true, then it's going to describe the way things really are. And so what is it that the Bible describes about the world that we're in? Well, first, it tells us that God is that explanatory background of everything that exists. Because we have God, who is the creator of all things, and then everything else is created. From the opening words of the Bible in Genesis 1:1, we see the words, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And if we flip to the New Testament, we find in the Gospel of John, the very beginning there, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Now, if you notice, these two verses both started with "in the beginning." John is pointing all the way back to the first words that Moses wrote through the inspiration of God, "In the beginning." And John 1:1, "In the beginning." But more specifically, John is talking about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so as John starts to unpack who it is that's creating, he begins to get very specific. And he says it's the Son who incarnated as the man Jesus Christ. That is the Word, and he is God. He is making a specific assertion about who this man Jesus Christ is. Because just a little further, John says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we saw his glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth." And John explains further that is this one that he's talking about that created. There is nothing that exists apart from what he created. Because in John 1:3, he says, "All things came into being through him. And apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being." That's a very specific statement. John is being very careful with his words to say that there is this metaphysical duality here. And I know that's a big word, but that's basically saying that there is this set of a dual understanding of reality. And that is, there's God. He is the only thing that is necessary. And God has existed. What's called ase, God's aseity, meaning that God has existed necessarily and sufficiently on his own. He doesn't depend on anything. And then there's creation, the other side of that metaphysical duality, that duality of reality. And basically, that's everything else. There's God, and everything that is not God was created by him. And so there's this asymmetrical relationship, if you will, between God and the world. You see, God can and he did exist without the world prior to its creation. However, the world cannot exist without God. And so God is a sustainer of all existence. And this is important for us to understand because this is the foundation of recognizing what is real. It's the foundation of when we look out at this world, at this life that we are living, at this place and time that we find ourselves in, we have to understand that this is the very foundation of reality. And the explanation for this reality, if we were to put a title on this reality, it could be referred to as what's called biblical theistic personalism. Now, that sounds like a complicated word or statement, but if we take a look at each one of those words and break them down, we can define each one of them. Biblical just simply means according to the Bible. Just means according to the Bible. Theistic being one God, right? So biblical theistic, according to the Bible, one God. Personalism, and that's basically saying personhood. God is a person. Now, he's not a human person, but he's a divine spiritual person. So now we have some more words that we need to look at and understand a little bit deeper. So the ultimate reality is we have a personal and supernatural creator being, right? So this is the ultimate reality. God is more real than anything else that exists because everything that exists depends upon God. Personal denotes that things like intent, it denotes actions, agency, the ability to deliberate, to think about two different options and choose the best one. A willfulness, in other words, has a will. So God is personal, meaning he has a will. Now, what personal doesn't mean is humanness. Humanness and personal, they're not synonyms. Now, to be personal doesn't require to be a human. However, the other way around, to be human, it does require being a person. We'll talk more about that in a later video. But it's important to understand that God is a spiritual person. He has personhood. Now, what about this word supernatural? And there's been a lot of different perceptions around this word supernatural and what this word means. Basically, supernatural just means beyond nature. Super, beyond, natural, nature. The sacred and holy, which transcends the natural. It does not mean that it's remote or distant, right? Just to say something supernatural doesn't mean that it has to be remote or distant. It also doesn't mean that it's occultic or esoteric, like it's hidden somehow. It just simply means that it's beyond nature. Now, as I mentioned before, I've made a lot of claims here. I've mentioned what the Bible says. I've mentioned that these things are true. I've mentioned that this is the foundation of reality. But for it to be true, it has to explain the way things really are. Now, in the past 100 years, two of the greatest scientific discoveries of all time have been made, which support the Christian view of reality. First one is that the universe had a beginning at some finite point in time in the past, right? So the universe, everything, time, space, and matter all came into being at some point in the finite past. Second, it's been around our ability to peer deeper into the cell and study life at a molecular level, so molecular biology. Now, while exploring the scientific data for the beginning of the universe, that'll come in a separate video. We'll talk more about that. Suffice to say that, this scientific work alone around the beginning of the universe and the developments of that just in the past 100 years has brought us to a level of scientific certainty that is 99.99999% certain. That's incredible. That's like 7 nines of certitude, of being certain about that the universe had a beginning. And since logically speaking, things that have beginnings and that come into existence, they must have a cause. And we know that there must be a supernatural cause to the beginning of the universe. After all, nature, which is governed by the laws of physics, is all within the universe. That's what nature is. That's where physics are found, is inside the universe that began. It governs this universe. Now, again, there's going to be a separate video discussing what we can know about this supernatural cause of the universe and these attributes of that cause. We also know, according to James Tour, he's also a leading molecular chemist, one of the top chemists in the world. He's been recognized as one of the top 10 chemists in the world. And his studies into origins of life, that life could not have risen from abiogenesis. Now, abiogenesis just means before the beginning of life, where there's no life, right? And to make that even simpler, it just means that life cannot come from non-life. You don't go from a state of there not being any life to all of a sudden there being life. And these two scientific discoveries, they correspond directly with the Bible's worldview assertion that a supernatural personal being is responsible for creating and sustaining the universe and all that lives and exists within it. And that is the foundation for a Christian metaphysic. And that's our starting point for building a worldview and understanding this world that we live in. That it's God, a necessary being, who is responsible for creating all things that have come into being.